So I like using this ICOM to tune around. Not using something different than listening to something different than ham radio. It's got a good general coverage receiver.
Decade, more than 1.5 million families have sent their videos to Legacy Box.
So, this thing goes way down, just wild.
What is going on here? If we take G.
So, what I want to talk about is something kind of interesting, because definitions matter for clarity. Keeps everybody on the same page, you know. Let's tune into that one. That's in the 40 meters there. So definitions matter, and there's confusion out there, I hear. Yeah, I'm not going to get nothing right now. I'll have to find something else, but there is confusion out there in my area about what shortwave is. And I'm going to explain that a little bit briefly. And so there's confusion whether VHF, UHF is considered shortwave. And it is not. And so very high frequency is VHF, ultra high frequency is UHF, and they're not considered shortwave. Turn that static down for you guys, sorry. Shortwave refers to radio frequencies in the HF band, typically between 3 megahertz and 30 megahertz. VHF and UHF are higher frequencies. VHF spans from 30 megahertz to 300 megahertz. So UHF spans from 300 megahertz to 3000 megahertz. So it's quite different. And there was some confusion on what how VHF and UHF is received, and what you should call it, and that kind of stuff. So people listening to VHF and UHF, say a 2 meter or 70 centimeter ham radio bands, that there's a net or something going on, and you're listening on a scanner device, you would not be listening to shortwave at that point. If you have, like I have several really cool shortwave receivers that do not have VHF and UHF signals. Shortwave is known for its ability to travel long distances by bouncing off the ionosphere, whereas VHF and UHF signals are generally more suited for line of sight communication, meaning they don't typically travel as far, and they're used for things like FM radio, even TV broadcasting, and cellular communications. So why does this matter, right? Well, for clarity, there has to be some sort of definitions on who is what you're doing. Like, how do you define what you're doing? A ham radio operator is called a ham radio operator for amateur radio, and it's a person who listens or transmits on VHF, UHF in the amateur radio bands, and is commonly called a ham operator or amateur radio operator. This really, this term generally refers to someone who both transmits and listens. Many ham operators spend a large amount of time listening to follow communications, right? But that does not equate shortwave frequencies within that. But they're called a ham radio operator. Even if they're not transmitting, they're licensed to transmit. Someone who listens would be probably called, there's not a universally standard term. So if you were to say, I'm a shortwave listener, you listen to, that's my hobby. I'm a shortwave listener, SWL.com or whatever it is, tons of shortwave frequencies. But that's how you would share with someone that is your hobby. This is what area of interest that I have. I'm a shortwave listener. There's not a universally standard term for someone who listens to VHF, UHF. So if you were to say I'm a shortwave listener by saying this is what I listen to is VHF, it wouldn't technically be correct. It's a loosely used term. People can understand what you mean, but if you want to define it out, technically that's not shortwave, and people would be confused. Like this example came up. Someone was wondering, how do you listen to this net on shortwave? That's really interesting to me. I'd like to hear about it. And so the term actually mattered in that point because they were listening on a scanner, and that person has shortwave radios. They wanted to tune in, and there was some confusion on how someone was listening to VHF, UHF and saying, oh, I'm a shortwave listener. And so there has to be some sort of definition there. So while there's no standard term, maybe a scanner enthusiast or a scanner listener, or say you listen to airband. I'm an airband listener, or public safety scanner hobby. I'm a scanner hobbyist, or something like that. There's key difference, right, in these things. Shortwave listeners typically focus on HF bands, while where international broadcasts, foreign radio stations can be heard. The distances are much greater. The frequencies are nowhere near the VHF, UHF, and the shortwave signals can travel far around the world, bouncing off the ionosphere, even over continents and whatnot. In contrast, VHF, UHF listeners are focused on localized regional communication. So if you're trying to, I don't think it's worth correcting someone over, really, but it's worth learning. If you're a person that wants to learn something, like if you're teaching a class, you need to, I believe you need to clarify and have the definitions properly explained. So someone, in summary here, I'm going to end this real quick because it doesn't matter a whole lot, but just understand what you're doing matters, what your terms are matter, and that's how you learn. Say there's a certain different language. Some people call it ham speak or whatever. I think that's a weird term, but there are codes and abbreviations and stuff that you use on ham radio that you don't use on CB, or you don't use the similar phonetics or language as, say, military or police would use when they're doing radio, sharing information and stuff like that. So there's different language that is included. So the definitions actually do matter, but it's probably, this is hard because you don't want to offend someone And you don't want to be a ham Nazi, and yet you want to teach people properly. So that's why I'm doing this video. It doesn't really matter. It's not worth going and correcting someone, especially in public. But that's why I'm doing this video, is for information. People can take what they can from this and adjust their learning. So in summary, let's maybe each term reflects a specific use and the focus of the listener. And same thing with transmitting or other uses, other bands, other things, right? When someone says on ham radio, "Oh, I'm broadcasting," it's like, no, you're not. You're not allowed to broadcast. The definition of broadcast has a meaning that is not allowed on ham radio. Broadcast means something completely different. You can transmit and communicate that way, but that's my point, is these things matter. They're not worth arguing over, but they're worth talking about and teaching and learning. So that's my goal in this video. But yeah, each term reflects specific use and the focus of the listener. Someone who listens to amateur radio on VHF, UHF may be actively participating in a community, which is wonderful, or a hobby, whatever. Whereas someone who listens to airband or public safety communications is more a passive observer, enjoying specific types of broadcasts or whatever. So in summary, someone who listens to VHF could be called a scanner enthusiast. Someone who is ham radio operator, transmits and listens on ham radio, they're licensed. They're called a ham radio operator or an amateur radio operator. If you listen to airband, I'm an airband listener, public safety scanner listener, scanner enthusiast. Some of these names, I think the scanner enthusiast term is probably, sounds cool, right? I'm a scanner enthusiast. And that gives some substance and meaning to what you're doing. And a lot of these folks that do listen to VHF, UHF, they do participate in the community and the hobby. So I think that's awesome. And a lot of them will probably go on to get their ham radio licensed, or, maybe even GMRS licensed, because you can listen to GMRS on a scanner as well. So you can put in all of the ham frequencies, the VHF, UHF, even the 1.25, 220 band. Some scanners will let you do that, and you can put in the GMRS. So, but that's not shortwave, just to clarify, so people understand. Shortwave is kind of confusing, but just remember that shortwave is HF. VHF, UHF is local communications, and that would be more line of sight communications, that kind of thing. Shortwave would be regional, further long distance, possibly even continental, stations coming in over, different continents and stuff. So anyhow, hope that helped you guys, and hope you enjoyed that. And yeah, it's worth learning and it's worth teaching, but it's not worth being a ham Nazi out there over it. So I will not ever attempt to do that, but I think it's good to learn new things. And I would never try and correct someone in public like that. It's like, let's use this as a tactful, I hope this comes across as a tactful attempt for a teaching moment and a learning moment for people to learn these things. So thanks for watching, you guys. Appreciate you. Have a good one.